All right, well, welcome everybody to the August 19th special meeting of the Expanded Budget Committee for the Tompkins County Legislature. I thank everybody for making time for this meeting. We've had a few ones and this is just one of those years. So I am also grateful to folks who were able to fill out the survey, the SurveyMonkey survey that we did. And I know there were challenges with it. We did get 13 out of 14 responses, and I will endeavor to, my thought for today simply was that we would go through the survey. I'll talk a little bit about how I drafted the questions, go through the results, and spend most of the time really talking about what we see from each other. So, and Jason will follow up towards the end of the meeting, I think, with the discussion of the results-based accountability and the data that we have based on that. And then kind of we can talk a little bit about the next steps. So let me just first say about the survey. I tried to make it relatively simple, but I didn't want, when I suggested, when the questions were framed as what would you cut or what would you preserve, I didn't want the categories to simply kind of mirror our committee structure. Almost hard to avoid that, but I tried to make it a little bit more nuanced than that. As a result, you see things like public safety includes alternatives to incarceration as well as law enforcement. So there are some within category contradictions. So people may have answered yes, cut or preserve that with different goals in mind. So maybe that might be something that we can discuss this hour. I also want you to know that in those questions where it was multiple choice, SurveyMonkey is able to randomize the answers. So everybody saw different lists. The lists were in different order for everybody except for that other comment at the end. So that'll be, that's something that might support, confidence in what we have here. So, so now let me see if I can share my screen. Hang in there for a second. I think I can do this. Which one is it? Where did it go? Sorry, folks. No, that's not it.
What are you looking for, Martha? The share screen button?
I got the button, but I'm not seeing the screen that I want to share, which is the SurveyMonkey thing.
Do you have it open?
Yeah, I do. All right, let me close all the other screens and see if that helps me out. This is my screen. I'm just going to keep talking for a minute while this is embarrassing. I can also just read everything to you, which would be really boring. That's it. All right, got it. Okay, can you see that? I'm sorry?
Excellent.
All right, good. What are your 2021 budget priorities? And as you saw from the emails, I did include staff on the questioning, but asked only that legislators respond. So the first question, how to cut? Yes, you sort of agree or disagree. I think we should cut departments the same across the board. Jason, in case you were thinking of doing this, which I don't think you were, you can see that the sentiment is very much not in that direction. So that was maybe kind of the easy one. So when you see here the actual numbers. So two people said neither agree nor disagree, and 4 said they disagree, 6 said they strongly disagree. There was the one survey that came in late, and that person said on this question, disagree. Okay, the next one, if we use targeted cuts, the following are the top 3 areas where I would preserve funding. So you can see the screen, the graph, and I would add that the person who couldn't get in, agreed to put down public safety, services for the vulnerable, and health and safety for the general public. So add to those numbers there. So public safety picks up 1, services for the vulnerable and health and safety also picks up 1. So recovery investments is pretty strong there. County functions, core county functions is pretty strong there. And again, here is the actual numerical list. It's pretty, it's pretty well spread out. 7 saying services, or 8 actually with the additional person, 8 saying services for the vulnerable as their top priority for preserving funding. Or if anybody's having trouble following this. So if we targeted question number 3, if we use targeted cuts, the following are the top 3 areas where I would cut or delay funding. So you see public safety would see some cuts, addressing racial justice, capital program. This one is, hold on, so it's capital program for maintaining current infrastructure. That's the purple one. This big one, capital program, new investments previously approved. For example, the green program.
Jesus.
It's a lot of those. Then the next big, the very biggest one is capital program investments that we've discussed but not approved. So here are the numbers again. And the additional person said take out, cut addressing racial justice, addressing our capital program, new approved, and capital program unapproved, new unapproved. So you could, in your minds, add 1 to each of those. So it's a pretty strong recommendation that we're going to get real nervous about capital, new capital investments, but we do need to have a good conversation about the use of fund balance versus target funding. Question 4, if possible, I would add funding in this area or for this purpose. So I could read these, or we could take turns reading these. First answer, I think we need to recognize our county I guess that means population may be much smaller going into the future. The students may not return. We may go from a county of 104,000 to one, say, 90,000 or fewer. Can we keep the same level of county employment with the loss of, say, 25,000 people? Next person, I'm more worried about removing funds at this point more than adding funds. Next person, TC3. Remember, this is, I would, if possible, add funding. TC3. Next one, public health to respond to testing, housing, et cetera, needs in the community. I don't think that was all of the answers. But all right, we'll come back to that. I'll look as we talk later. What else would you like to share about what you would do, your goals and or your worries? Let me back up the other person who answered late on question 4 about adding funding. There are and will be opportunities because of the vast changes caused by the pandemic. We should be open to thinking innovatively about where we can take advantage of these opportunities. The corner property is one example. While it seems counterintuitive to think about a purchase, it may be a long-term value at a low price that we would never see otherwise. Question 5, I'll stay with that person. I know that we will know more as time goes by. We will have a much better understanding of our economic situation in 6 months and even more in a year. I worry that we make decisions now about cutting funding to agencies or efforts that then die, and bringing them back turns out to be hard or impossible. Where we cut, we should try to allow the organization or program to limp but not die. As a trade for more knowledge, I'm willing to spend some fund balance. I say this understanding that if things get worse instead of better, we will need to make more painful decisions in 2021. I also think it is a poor time for a large tax increase. I'm inclined to spend fund balance to avoid a large increase in property taxes. I understand this may lead to having to do so next year, but again, we should have better information then. And back to the other answers. All right, where'd that go? I'm sorry, I've lost it. How'd it go? Where did that go? Dang. All right. Sorry, folks. I'm not a techie and I've lost this thing. All right, let me just go ahead and ask for your thoughts, oh, there it is. Okay. So question number 5. My worry is that when it comes to sharing cuts, it will have to come from discretionary spending, and people and legislators are very attached to those as that's what they've committed to personally. Cutting any of that will be very difficult. Next person, we really should not see smaller programs as inherently less valuable because they're small, but rather base assessment on the service to the community and how it matches our priorities. Also, we should look at both absolute dollar amounts as well as percentage of total program budgets. Next person, I think we should aim to not lay off any of our workers. Legislators should have more input into what specifically we're cutting. Next, not more than a 6% real property tax rate increase if possible, as few layoffs as possible. Preserve a healthy fund balance because it is one-time funding and has to be replaced with taxes the next year. Next, do not lay off any staff. Reduce hours, partial furlough, etc. Try everything else, but do not lay off staff at this time. Delay capital projects except for ventilation and security at the jail. Support programs and personnel that deal with the racial inequities and other social and economic justice issues. Looking forward to a very interesting budget season. True. We are not going to be in a position to make individual cuts. Most of our budget is mandatory and most of the other part comes based on department heads' advice. How do we make independent decisions on programming? I'm also concerned about using so much fund balance to resolve our fiscal situation. Next, I would look at each program. I do not find this broad categorization particularly helpful. There are some programs in each category I would consider reducing, and there are others I would not. I think we should use the fund balance to do as close to a maintenance of effort budget as possible. I also think we should aim for 0% tax increase. I do understand that since we do not know the size of the 2021 budget hole we are facing, using the fund balance to cover everything may not be appropriate. However, that is the assumption I would like to start with. Next, again, the concern or worry that we will deplete our general fund too quickly. Next person, I see the financial recovery taking at least 5 years, so one of my goals is to titrate our capital and any other reserve funds to get us through. Next person, I want to be very aware and not waste our fund balance. I also want us to look at all programming and services and see what we can trim down. Finally, I want to make sure that we don't cut so far that it will cost more to rebuild later. So I can save this on the screen. I think it might be better if I stop the sharing and go from there. You all should have that link to that survey in your file, in your email, if you want to take a minute and look for that. And then the last thing I would say is that last person. Okay, I already did cover that, what that person said. All right, so this is a snapshot of how we feel with the information that we have right now. Our responses to these particular questions. They're a little bit off, all over the place, which I understand. But our staff is listening and the public is listening as well. So I'm just going to throw it open and would invite your comments. And frankly, if I don't hear from folks, I'm going to call on people because I used to be a teacher in a classroom and, you know, we think we can do that. So who wants to dive in first? What, Deborah? What? I saw that face. Any reactions to the survey?
Dan's waving his hand.
Oh,
Yeah, let
sorry, Dan.
speak first.
Sorry, Dan. I have to make sure to remember to go look over there visually. All right, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So it seems to me that we are going to have to make some decisions about what we might cut. We don't know how much we might have to cut because we don't know the numbers we're looking at yet, but it's likely at some point we have to say we want to reduce this program or we want to eliminate this program. And I would like, as I've been sending some emails about, I would like to see a list of programs with costs attached so that when we get to that stage, we have something to work from. In a normal budget year, we do almost no cutting. We do some adding. And the process for that adding is basically like I just described. We have a list, a literal list of programs that we could add or not with a dollar amount attached to them. And we say, well, we'd like to add this, it's going to cost this much, it's going to add this much to the target, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we do it. And I don't know how we can think about what programs we want to cut if we don't have a similar list. So that is my request. I understand it's a much bigger list and more complicated, and it cannot be a perfect list because there's going to be factors that involve each one. But at some point, if we don't have that list, I don't know how we're going to possibly subtract from the budget, which is what I think we need to, probably will need to do.
Thanks, Dan. Shawna.
Hi, so perhaps I'm confused about the process that we've had in the past and the process we're talking about moving forward. I know that typically, and we have been in a better situation, but Jason has given us a proposed budget and we worked off of that. Are we saying this year that we're going to take over the budget? You know, because I know that Jason and his staff are putting in a lot of time to give us a proposed budget. You know, my thought is to let them do the hard lift right now and see what he's going to present us with. And then we make amendments from there.
I would say that that's how I see it as well, but I'll open, you know, people can react to the survey, react to anything, react to what Dan said. This is an open discussion. I hear you, Shawna. So your idea being that more or less follow what we've done before, let staff craft a coherent budget and then we respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense to me. None of us are accountants, and I certainly don't have the time nor the want to have to recreate our budget. You know, so that's my input on that point. You know, another thing that I noticed after I turned in my survey was thinking about the fact that if we're going to be doing enforcement for public health issues, right now probably would not be the best time to cut public safety, especially if we're going to see that have to ramp up as the students arrive in our community. So that, you know, to me, whenever I was filling out the survey, I actually put that under, I think, health and safety, but that might actually fall under public health as well.
That's a really interesting point about the kind of nuances in how to draw those categories. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
You bet. Got Henry, Deborah, and then Annie.
Yes. Jason had people do flat budgets and then negative 12% budgets. Is he going to present us with two budgets, or is he going to present us with just one recommended budget that include some people with -12 and other 12.5%, and then other people at flat budgets.
Jason?
I'll be proposing one budget to you. And then, well, most likely what would happen is the base is going to be the 12% reduction budget. And then what I would see happening is I would be recommending a series of generally OTRs that would either reinstate most or portions, or depending on the circumstances, programs within certain budgets. But the OTRs that aren't recommended are still going to be representing programs. So then that's your ability to evaluate whether or not this program is something you want to put back in the budget or take out a recommended OTR, similar to the process you followed in the past.
Okay,
Your question,
so,
Henry?
yeah, well, I was wondering if we wanted to, I assume we cannot go past the 12.5%.
Teresa. I mean, you can, obviously there's nothing is prohibiting the legislature from saying, not only do we not want to accept any of those OTRs, but we want to cut the budget further. There's nothing that has ever prohibited you from doing that. And you can definitely do that. You know, the key element in that discussion, if there's a department, let's say, for example, where it's what's been proposed is not what you want to settle on, but yet you want to reduce a position or positions or program you want to completely eliminate. What would be a key component to that decision is for you to ask, you know, the questions of myself and the department head of, all right, if we eliminate this, what's the impact of it? What does that mean? What's not going to happen? What is going to happen? What goes on with the service? You know, it's hard to speak about it. I know I'm speaking kind of globally because it's hard to be able, I mean, every department's different, but you know, what will be the impact of this reduction? So that is a question that should be asked if that's a point of consideration that's above what's been recommended.
Okay, thanks.
That cover it, Henry?
Did I answer your question, Henry?
Yes, I did.
It's a good question. It's a good question.
Yeah, I agree. Good question. Thanks. Deborah?
Yeah, I could probably talk about this for half an hour. Yeah, I agree with Shauna. We're not going to build a budget from the ground up that was created by legislators. It's going to have to come from Jason and Kevin. And I guess the first question I would have about that is that in past years, we've set a target for how much we want to raise taxes. I think it's more important than ever that we set that target because so many people are hurting. But secondly, I think we need a target for how much fund balance we're willing to spend. Because if we're just simply totally reactive, we're going to run the risk of depleting our fund balance too quickly. And the issue is made more difficult by the fact that we're not going to know how much fund balance we will have depleted to make up the operating deficit from this year. It really concerns me that people say things like, I don't want to lay anybody off. That is definitely a laudatory goal, but it's unrealistic. We're facing something that's pretty much unprecedented in any of our experiences. Jason said much earlier this year that we're going to have to make systemic changes in county government. Systemic changes means that we're going to have to lay people off and we're going to have to cut programs. When Dan talks about a list of the possible programs we can cut, I agree that we're going to end up probably doing kind of a reverse OTR process. You know, instead of deciding what we want to add, we may look at Jason's budget and say, that's too much. We're going to have to make cuts somewhere. I did make a list of the discretionary programs that we're funding. I think at the point where we want to do this reverse OTR thing, we should be asking, you know, what's the impact of this particular program that's discretionary on the community. What is it costing us? How many people is it employing? And how much money does it leverage for us? Because many of these discretionary programs are simply pass-throughs for grants that are coming from somewhere else. And we certainly can't afford to cut those. So I'm sorry that that's all kind of a big jumble, but those are my concerns. You know, I think I view my primary responsibility as a county legislator to be a fiduciary to my constituents who pay taxes. So even over and above, and I know this is not going to be very popular, but even over and above serving our you know, less affluent and more needy populations, I feel an obligation to my taxpayers. I can't deplete their fund balance too much, given that this could last for years. And I can't raise their tax too much because they're hurting too. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Deborah. Annie and then Anna.
Thanks, Martha. So can you restate first the goal of today? I mean, I kind of have an idea, but I want to just make sure that we're clear on that.
The idea really came from many of you, just more of a chance for us to talk and not ask for another staff presentation. And Jason assured me he has 2 ears and a mouth and he's happy to listen today. So I didn't prepare this as anything that would lead to a vote. Haven't been thinking that we would come up with a number either of cut or tax levy or fund balance, but that this would be an open-ended discussion. This is an iterative process, this, you know, more than ever before. So I wanted just to give ourselves a little time to reflect with each other. And by the way, the survey was not intended to come up with sort of directives either. It was sort of meant to make us all think ahead of the meeting, make us all think about these questions separately, individually. And I plan to send out the same survey after we're done here, so that in case the discussion has modified anybody's answers, we can see what, you know, if that's happened, or you may just be reinforced in what you've already put down on the first survey.
Thank you. So that's pretty much what I garnered from, you know, reading your emails and hearing you talk about this. So I appreciate you doing this because I think to take the pulse for us to talk about this versus waiting till we have some stuff on the table, we get to see where each other's at, and we might be able to go forward easier, I hope, even though we're all over the place, which is what I expected. We're all coming at it from different ways and have different priorities right now, and hopefully we can coalesce a little bit better. So what I want to say at this point is that, and a lot of this people know, but I just want to state this: people in our community and our employees, everybody's not hurting in an equitable manner. So people that people of color, people with low incomes, various people that have a couple of part-time jobs put together, people that are in rural areas, single parents. I mean, I could go on, but so I think we know that, and especially when I see that when there was an overwhelming response to saving the programs that help people that could be homeless and the people most in need. So I saw that was a high priority. So I just want to say, but on the other hand, I saw the social justice issues were something that maybe weren't people's priorities. And maybe if we had been able to put 4, and I'm not saying change it, but maybe if that was a 4th one, but I want people to think about that as we take care of our employees, and which several people, I'm sure all of us, but several people actually put that about, not laying off anybody, because we care about those people, that we're stewards of them. We're, and as we're doing the economic recovery, as we're doing police reform, we need and we can do that through a lens of social justice. And because this has, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we've done really a lot of damage to people by putting some people having special privileges, some people, many people getting wealth at the expense of other people. So we've done this, and this is a time for us to do this in a more equitable lens. So it can be done. To me, it's not, and I know you had to figure out how to, put things in the committee or the questionnaire. So I'm not saying anything bad about this, but I think we can do that together, and I think we need to. And I think more than ever now we have a mandate to do that. And I am definitely willing to help, remind us and be that, help one of those people to be that broken record to look at that as we're going through the budget process, and we're helping come out of this, or survive this pandemic and come out of this economic hardship. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Amanda?
I was here, Martha also.
I'm sorry, Anna, and then Amanda. Anna,
Jason,
why don't you, it's really faint. Why don't you turn off your video? Maybe your sound will come through better.
I will try that. Is it still very faint?
Yeah.
No, it's better. I think it's a little better.
Yeah, I don't know why that's happening with my computer, but I think that it's really important for us to remember that the budget season, although it's just starting for us, it has not just started for our staff. As is always the case, they're working on it starting with earnest in April. So I guess, Jason, my question, if you could give us a bit of a summary of what the process has been. I mean, I'm assuming with all the departments, there's already been a discussion of you requesting from them ideas of where programs and services could be cut, and that the budgets that they're proposing to you already incorporate that. That's one of my questions. And the other is, you have presented in budget meetings up to now 2 scenarios, worst case scenario, best case scenario, and given us a range of what we might expect. But you said you're presenting 1 budget. So I'm curious what number you've used to develop the budget that you are ultimately going to give us to review as your recommended base budget.
Sure. So we have just about concluded. Kevin and I had a meeting this morning with one department. I think we have another one tomorrow, and that, I think, wraps up for the most part our second series or runs of meetings that we've had. So I think for the most part, we're probably done meeting formally with departments. They have all submitted budgets within the guidelines that I asked for, specifically meeting the 12% reduction local share budget, the 12% target reduction, which is painful, particularly when you get in departments of different sizes and when departments have fully, local funding versus some that don't. And it's inherently complex. I mean, you're dealing with budgets like the Department of Social Services and then weights and measures, right? I mean, they're vastly different. And so while it's not a one size fits all approach, it's a starting point, which is what I articulated to them and to you, and that it's a good starting ground for the conversation. I will say that for the most part, your department heads, they understand the impacts of this on their services and the departments they're in. So they've taken this very seriously. They've made very good efforts to try to identify ways that they can save, the way they can provide services differently. We are having some interdepartmental discussions about shifting of responsibilities, maybe bringing different functions together. They have responded well. The vast majority, nearly all of them, have responded very well to this, even though it's very difficult. I mean, you're talking about in some instances, a lot of shifting and changing, and it requires people to think about things a little differently. So I think from from my perspective, the department heads have done a great job in trying to propose budgets that fit within the scope that I've given them. Now comes the challenge of identifying, difficult decisions on how to sustain certain programs or certain departments based on what they've submitted, both short-term and long-term. There's the balance. So that's one issue. There's issues of balancing personnel costs, which are operating costs, versus maybe capital costs, like equipment and capital infrastructure, which you've talked a lot about in your survey. There's balancing that and all of this. And then there's the revenue balance. So for predominantly, Anna, the discussion we've had at budget meetings has been around a range in revenue loss, right? Mild and severe scenarios. So one thing that has happened, which is what you would expect, as more time goes on, you get more information, and hopefully those scenarios are coming closer together, which they are. There's more of one big outlier now more than the other. And at the beginning of this, sales tax was the outlier. Like, what's going to happen? You see that sales tax information that Rick gave us the other day, which is good sector information. You see certain sectors all over the board, but that's starting. I personally think that will start to balance a little bit more, and it'll do what we think. Originally, what we thought would happen is it'll start to level out a little bit more, right? This month was not as severe as last month. It's not as severe as the prior month. I suspect students return. It'll continue down that path of the new way to look at it isn't how much growth did we have over the prior month. It'll just be how much less was it less than the prior month of the prior year, right? I mean, generally we've been comparing it of, hey, we had a new growth factor this month compared to the prior year. Well, now it's just we don't have as much less of sales tax that we did in 2019. So hopefully then we get back to a point 6 months, maybe a year, where your month is then growing over your prior month. And that should be better because this current year is so much drastically lower. One thing to keep in mind is something that you'll find yourself doing as we've gone to is 2020 is going to be a hard comparative year. So as we go through this year and into next year, you're going to find yourself comparing to 19 as the base year, right? Where were we pre-COVID? So a lot of times you're going to find yourself using those comparisons. Point being is that I think sales tax is going to start to flatten out or scale back, scale up, however you want to say it. You're not going to see the high fluctuations and drastic changes. I think the unknown right now is the state aid piece of the puzzle. And I still think it's going to be a double hit. I think you're going to get hit this year, and I think we're going to get hit in January when the executive budget comes out. I just don't know what it's going to be. And I think in the matter of 2 weeks, we're just going to have to probably identify some level of contingency to cushion what's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be positive news out of Albany. I think it's going to be, critical, and it's going to cut our funding. But what we're trying to do is not only put a budget in place for 21, but also hedge some bets as to what we think is going to happen with the state budget, so that when we go to a 22 budget or even a mid-year 21, we don't have to make massive corrections. I think we've accepted the fact that there's going to be changes that we're not going to anticipate, but we want to try to minimize that as much as possible. So to answer your question, the response from department heads has been receptive. They have collectively probably over 500 years of leadership experience in their fields. They understand the stresses on the systems and the functions and the way they work in their environments. So they know how to react to it. They've been responsive to their budget requests. Kevin and I just kind of mapped out today the next several days of work where we're going to try to refine the revenues to try to really start to get a snapshot of things as to what we're looking at. Now, that said, let me just share a screen with you from a prior presentation, if that's all right, if I can do that.
Yeah. Do I have to do anything, Kathy?
You have to do nothing.
Yeah.
I don't think. Wait a minute. Now I got to figure out how to do this.
While you're
Sorry.
up, I just wanted to mention my two other comments, so I'm not wasting people's time. One is just that our opinions spanned the gamut from use down our fund balance and don't furlough anybody to don't touch our fund balance, and we need to be really respectful of the fact that we're going to have to let people go. And I just hope this process, we don't try and hammer each other and convince each other so much. I mean, every decision is 8 votes or more. It goes one way, and it goes the other way. And just hoping there's space for that one. And the other comment that I had is that, whether people are marginalized or not, they're all taxpayers. It's just that some people that have, you know, been dealing with structural racism or generational poverty, because of the way the system is, are impacted greater. And that's a purpose of a lot of our social programs, is to create equity. So that is how I took, Martha, your question. And that's why I prioritized it. So I just want to make clear that that's how I saw it.
Thanks, Anna. Did you have anything else, Anna, or just let?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Jason will finish, and then Amanda.
So this is just from a slide I think I put together in June to kind of show you impact based on assumptions at a time. And there are some things that have changed, but just to give you order of magnitude, based at that time where revenues were much more dire, a maintenance of effort required this type of levy increase. With the 12% reduction in target, which is what I've offered, you're still at around a 10% tax increase. Now, the reason I bring that up is, you know, things that have changed. In this number, there was, I think, a much more severe reduction in sales tax than what I think is going to end up. So that'll add relief to this point. But just to show you order of magnitude, the EF map reconciliation has been taken into account. State aid reductions, we don't know. Capital changes are yet to come. Staffing and other reductions, we have an understanding. I think we had 40 plus people retire. So we have some flexibility with staffing into what we will fill and what we won't fill. And economic recovery is a big outlier, but this just kind of gives you back to reflect a little bit on what we had talked about back in June. And I don't think that that's, you know, that slide isn't out of whack completely to what we might be facing.
Can I ask a question about that slide specifically before we move on? Can you translate each percentage of levy increase into an amount that we would have to use in fund balance in order to reduce the tax levy increase?
We can translate what a 1% tax levy increase is in dollars. Yes, it's usually between the $450,000 $500,000 range.
Thank you.
Yep. But we usually do that every year, and it changes every year. So we'll make sure it's accurate, but we can definitely provide that information.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. Amanda.
Thanks. Let's see, a couple thoughts. I was going to actually kind of say something similar to what Anna said, that, you know, we all have different priorities, and clearly we all have different constituents and things that we personally want to keep or not keep. And I personally would love to not hear big, long speeches about your political beliefs. We all, you know, we all have our views, and that's great, but I'd hope that we can just stick to, you know, the vote, however you vote is making your political statement. So that's just my little plug there. I guess I'm still also trying to understand the process. So I think, you know, obviously Jason and all the staff has been working really hard, and they're the ones who understand it, and they're the ones who are putting in the hard work, which is wonderful and awesome. So what do we do? I mean, you're bringing something to us. We're not going to have the sort of traditional OTRs of like, oh, we want to add this, we don't want to add this, we vote on that. What are we voting on? I mean, if there's no list of potential things to cut, or I guess I'm just unclear. Like, what is it we're going to be doing?
I can take that. Jason, do you want to answer?
Do you want to go first?
What?
You can go first if you want to.
Yeah, I think we are going to, in a way, it's kind of the same process as usual, but with like a minus sign in front of things. The kind of the beauty of what the staff does is that they weigh all these interrelated, complex calculations, and in a way that 14 people couldn't possibly do.
Right.
And so I think that it'll be our job to listen as to why these decisions were made. what, you pull this thread over here and it affects that thread over there, and how do these things work together? And I think what our job will be is to say, that's a reasonable set of solutions to our problem, or we want to shift more here and take more there and raise more there, or not, or raise less there. I see it sort of like, editing something as opposed to trying to draft it from scratch. I think it was Annie who said,
Sure.
don't
Yeah,
see building from the bottom up.
That totally makes sense, and I get that. But again, like, will there be a specific list? Shauna said we're not accountants, and we're not. But without, like, I can't go through the whole budget book and say, here's the thing that we should shift to make this shift like this. Like, that's what Jason and the staff are doing. But so is there a list?
Yeah, before I go to you, Jason, there are a couple of lists. I sent the link to a couple of the program impact assessment documents, the 2014 and 2017 that had been put together by Joe and also Jason. Deborah took a stab at a list and said, here's another way of looking at discretionary versus mandatory, et cetera. I certainly invite anybody to dig into any of those lists that you're interested in. Jason's going to talk about results-based accountability as well. And look for, educate yourselves on each department and what they do, so that when we see what the staff has come up with, we might be better educated. We might have some ideas in mind of, like, hey, I noticed this thing didn't look like a great way to spend money. So you have lists you can work on yourselves.
Okay.
A group process of 14 people going through 436 pages of programs. I didn't think that was going to be us,
Yeah.
Jason, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it definitely challenges the typical process, Amanda, and it's a good. It's a good question of how do we move forward and how do we assess, $200 million budget. And so I think there are several things to think about. One, the staff does a lot of heavy lifting, right? They're going to be presenting to you a budget with understanding of all of these constraints that we're currently experiencing on the revenue side of things. And that's partly my job, is to let them know, saying, hey, this is the resource side of it. This is where the expense side needs to be doing. So there's going to be a very strong effort to reduce expenditures to be able to match what we think our resource side of it is. From there, you're going to see OTRs. Some will be recommended by me and some won't be recommended by me. And that is because as I'm trying to put a budget together, I'm trying to find the sweet spot, so to speak, of the blend of expenses and revenues based on what we know. And I think that's where you're going to start those conversations is, all right, I agree with some of these OTRs. I don't agree with these. So the ones that weren't recommended, I think we should have the other, I think we should recommend them and vice versa. Not to mention, there can definitely be OTRs from the legislature, as there has been in the past, saying I want to add this or not. I think more than ever, and I'll say this because I think it's something to make sure we understand, more than ever, we will probably be doing in-between meeting analysis on a much greater basis than we ever have before, because you're going to ask for input and feedback as to what happens when this happens, right? Mm-hmm. Where if I really am thinking about cutting out this position or positions, I want this to be I think we need to understand what this analysis is. Now that can also be a double-edged sword of having us go in 15 different directions all the time on it. But I think that will happen more frequently than it's ever happened in the past, because there's a cause and effect that you need to understand if you're going to make a decision. So, it's not a perfect science of it, but I mean, that's where the starting phase is what we're proposing to you, to try to make an amicable budget that continues service levels, that is affordable. And then from there, you'll move that needle as you see fit as a legislature. Okay, I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Martha. And I guess just sort of a follow-up. So we're still going to be having department heads give presentations, and we'll have a chance to ask them questions about, right, okay.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the process for sure.
Okay, thank you.
So I see Henry and Deborah's hands up, but I would really like to,
Dan had his hand up too.
I wish there were a way to get, Kathy, can you get Dan, is there a way for you to push a button so Dan's hand little blue hand goes up?
No, not as host. I can't do that. It's not an option.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Dan. So I got the three of you, you've all spoken already. Can I push a little bit on the folks who haven't? I see Mike Sigler, Leslin, Dave, Glenn, are all here. And I'd like to, see what you have to say. Glenn.
You're on mute, Glenn. Glenn, you're on mute.
Glenn, you're still muted.
It was profound.
You should have heard what I said.
You're going to have to recapture it.
To tell you one thing, Jason, that slide you showed scared the heck out of me. A little community in Tompkins County, that's impossible for us to do something like that.
I'm sorry, Glenn, to do what? I didn't hear the beginning.
To have a tax raise of 10%.
Okay.
There's no way we can do that. I'm interested in seeing the proposed budget. I want to see what our professional administrators are going to tell us, what we can and can't do. They understand what situation we're in and how we're going to go from there. I think Deborah's question about a goal for the tax increase, that's out this year. I don't think we can possibly do that. In the fund balance issue, we're not going to make a decision until at least October on that situation. But I do agree with Shauna and Jason about what we're going to have to do this year. So it's going to be a tough one.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. Leslin. That waving your hand, like move on. Okay, Mike Sigler.
Hi. So, yeah, where to start? I won't take too long. I mean, my main concern is, frankly, I looked at the monkey poll, the monkey survey, and the places that people were most comfortable not cutting, I guess, are the places that will probably have to be looked at. And that's the part, I guess, that concerns me the most. I don't really need the Department of Social Services to come in and tell me what they do, because let's face it, it's such a big department, but a lot of their funding comes from someplace else. It doesn't come from us. So while it's, you'll be able to know who said this in the poll actually, was that the problem we're going to face is the places that we're going to probably have to look at are the places people really like. I mean, the discretionary expenses are things like, I'm not advocating any of these cuts, but the Department of Human Rights. Nobody on this legislature is going to want to cut that, but that's all our funding, right? So we can talk about, cuts and things like that, but I mean, how serious are we really about talking about those things? Because, I really like the planning department. We get, in some things in the planning department, we get a lot of money back. I mean, I look at the money that we saved just this past year from the planning department. But when you're looking at what's local funding, that's that. So, to have Department of Social Services come in and talk to us for an hour, I mean, that's just an enormous department. I don't know what kind of benefit I get out of that. Or even the Sheriff's Department. That, again, it's a lot of local funding for the road patrol. But then again, how much further can you cut down on the road patrol before the road patrol isn't an effective thing anymore? Whereas at what level does it become something like, why do we even have a road patrol? You're going to get to a level of funding that it doesn't serve the purpose that it's intended. So I guess that's kind of the question I'm at now is, what can we even look at cutting? I don't know if we as a group, as 14 people, can look at it and say, because none of the cuts are going to be easy, right? I mean, these are all going to be people that right? I can't actually look at the Department of Social Services and say, oh yeah, I know 200, 190 out of the 200 people working there. But when you're looking within, like, I believe we have to protect core services. But frankly, can some of those core services get by with 3 people instead of 4? I don't know. But the problem is we're going to know those 4 people because those are the people we interact with every day. So are those really cuts that we're going to sign off on? And if they're not, then it seems like we're going to invest an awful lot of time in talking about it when we're not going to be able to pull the trigger in the end anyway. So with that in mind, the fund balance is certainly there. I don't want to spend it down. I think what Deborah was saying was correct. You can't spend beyond a point. But then again, we've been pretty diligent about saving that money, and the rain is here. This is pretty much it. I don't know how long it's going to last, and we have to be careful with it. But clearly, a 10% tax increase is not going to fly with anybody either. I guess that's where I'm at. That wasn't helpful at all, anything that I just said. But I don't want to. It seems like we're going to be talking about a lot of things that just probably aren't going to happen anyway. So that's what I'd like to see is what kind of discretionary spending is out there that's actually even on the table, or is it something that we're just not going to do?
All right, let me respond to a couple things. Let me respond to a couple of things before I go to the 3 hands up. I'm sorry, wait, is there anybody else who hasn't spoken? Dave McKenna, I'm sorry, Dave. You're muted.
Yeah, not anymore, I fixed that. Anyway, I just think we gotta put as many eggs as we can in the basket of capital programs. Spend as little money on capital programs as possible, with the exception of the bridge and culvert replacements, things like that are, serious nature that could cause serious accidents and things like that. Public safety, a lot of people think that we should cut public safety. I totally disagree with that. I think given the fact that people are hurting, I think you're going to see an increase in crime. And I think public safety is going to need as much funding as they currently have, at least. And we're going to have to figure out a way to do something different to make that up. Given that we've had all these early retirements and so on and so forth, is there any way we can cut hours instead of people and still keep the departments effective? That would be my recommendation there. I'm sure we're going to have to lay a few people off or trim a couple departments back or something like that, but not across the board. That's kind of where I'm at. So that's what I've got to say for right now.
Thank you very much, Dave. And listen, all these comments, Mike, you said, I don't know if any of that's helpful. Yeah, it's all helpful. This is incubation. We're chewing these things around. I think it's really important for people to just have this time. And I really appreciate the conversation. I'll make a couple of quick comments of substance here. First off, everybody should remember that renters pay property taxes too through their landlords. So, you might think, oh, property taxes only affect homeowners. It affects everybody. Fund balance, we've been talking about like being careful not to spend fund balance on ongoing expenses, say personnel. We can do, when we do a one-time appropriation, we haven't done one-time cuts maybe ever, but when we do either a one-time appropriation or cut, that comes out of fund balance. But remember, we have to then look at it the following year. Every one of those we look at each year, whether it's a 1, 2, or 3 year cut or addition. So that is a way to make the fund balance work for us for personnel costs, but we have to be careful about how we do that. I think that we should remember that, you know, these are going to be hard decisions. And Mike, if we are the ones who have the responsibility to say, I'm going to make a purely political decision because I think this whole mix of things is where my constituents are, my values are. And there is no one perfect budget. There will not be a perfect budget. We come in after the staff has worked its magic, you know, we come in with that political lens, basically. I would also point out that, and somebody wrote in the survey, we're going to know a whole lot more in 2 weeks. We'll know more in 3 weeks. And we'll know a lot more by October. So, you know, we're going to have to remain flexible as news comes through if the federal government, you know, finally comes around to taking some action, when we see what the state does, et cetera. So I'm sure what Jason produces on September 8th, he'll probably end up having a list of revisions to make depending upon how circumstances change. So let's see, I'm going to go to Dan, and then I've got Henry, Deborah, and Amanda.
Thank you. So first of all, the fund balance we've been talking about, and whoever's on the call that knows better, correct me if you have a better number. I believe it's in the $45 million range at this point. That is our fund balance. It's a very, very large number. So let me just throw some round numbers around, because all we have are ranges and estimates right now. Let's say that we need $10 million to plug the budget hole this year, the 2020 budget hole. And Jason just threw up a slide estimating 11.5 million for next year for doing maintenance of effort. He said it's probably a little better now. So let's just call that 10 million as a round number also for next year. So we could say take $20 million and not lay off a single person and not raise taxes a penny. Now, I understand all those numbers might change a lot. There's a lot of things assumptions built into that. That is the assumption I would like to start our budget with. That what would it take to do a maintenance of effort, not lay anybody off, and not raise taxes a penny? If it costs half the fund balance, I cannot think of a better use for the fund balance. Now, we've been hearing a lot of like, well, this is a 5-year, you know, downturn. We have to save this fund balance for the outgoing years. And I agree with that. But let's just acknowledge nobody knows what's going to happen next. So what I would like to do is use our fund balance to buy ourselves a year. 1 year from now, we're going to be having the same conversation. We have to. And we're going to know an awful lot more. And maybe things are as dire as we think. Maybe they're even worse. And that's when we need to start really cutting and start laying off, maybe raising taxes. That's fine. We don't need to do it. I don't think we're going to need to do it if we don't want to. This is what the fund balance is for, in my opinion. We already heard the rainy day analogy. It's pouring out. This is our rainy day fund. It's very large. Let's use it.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Henry, Deborah, Amanda.
Yes, Jason, when we pass the tax levy, when we go exceed it, what things do we lose from the state? What funding?
You mean the tax cap, Henry?
Yeah, tax cap.
I only know of one thing right now that would be in jeopardy, and that's RTA aid, but I don't know that it's not a whole lot of money to begin with. And there's a hardship waiver that a community can complete. So I would imagine this falls into the hardship element. Other than that, I don't know of anything else that's tied into the tax cap at this moment.
But doesn't that whatever amount we charge that exceeds the levy, exceeds the cap, doesn't that get subtracted from next year's allowable cap?
I'd have to look at the tax cap calculation, but I don't think so. If you override it, I mean, that's your new base in terms of You won't have any carryover, obviously, because you didn't leave any tax cap on the table, so to speak. But I don't think it penalizes you the following year. But we can look at it again.
Yeah, check that. I thought that was the stick part of
That's
the,
only if you fail to override it, Martha. If you fail to override it, it'll penalize you for sure.
if you fail to pass that local law.
If you don't pass the override and you exceed the tax cap, you will get penalized the next year.
Okay, all right. Hope that's right. Thank you very much. Anything else, Henry?
Yeah, Jason, during your budget, are you going to recommend how much fund balance and what the tax levy should be?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so in any budget year, there's a use of fund balances, an increase. There has been an increase in the tax levy. Obviously, this year I'm probably going to have to do some different layout and explanation and have probably some more longer term financial impact to kind of show you short and longer term impacts of decisions. But I'll have to call it out a little bit more. But in any given year, it's identified in your budget in terms of what's your appropriated fund balance and what's your tax levy increase. Just so you know, your OTRs, your one-time OTRs, essentially are using fund balance. So on any given year, you're using around $2 to $2.5 million of fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
Deborah.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. I've got a question and then a couple of comments. The question is for Jason. Jason, when you do the MOE, does that MOE include maintaining the discretionary programs that we've been funding?
It's the maintenance of effort, yes.
Okay, thank you. Comments. I think it would be helpful to remember, apropos of comments several people have been made about how difficult this process is going to be, that if somebody wants to cut something, it's not because they think it's a bad program. I don't think we have any bad programs. The issue is we can't afford all the programs we have. So which programs are less valuable in that scenario? And yeah, we need to not take that personally. And the other thing I wanted to address was Glenn's comment about not being able to set a target. I mean, we may not be able to set a target in advance, but what we're ultimately going to be arguing about, Glenn, is how much of a tax increase and how much of a depletion of fund balance we're comfortable with. And, you know, we might as well have that conversation sooner rather than later, but whatever your preference is, we're going to be having that conversation. And I will say, just off the top of my head, I am not comfortable with depleting $20 million of fund balance. It would be very helpful to know what our fund balance is, but I think by the end of this year, it's not going to look like anything like $45 million.
Thanks, Deborah. I think I invite people to the 3 o'clock meeting of the audit to review the audit, where we will be talking about fund balance, I think, quite a bit. Amanda and then Leslyn.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just wondering, Jason, if it's possible when the department heads are planning their presentations, you know, they usually give like, oh, we accomplished this year and we have this program. If they could sort of be directed to focus more solely on their, you know, what they've cut or what they're reducing, or, you know, we don't need to know all the little great programs that they do. We need to know what changes they're suggesting.
The direction I plan on giving them is to have their presentations be very succinct. Even some of the information they've usually presented on isn't really relevant, and in terms of just some of the data that they always have in their slides. So I'm going to work with them to try to identify real impacts of the proposed budget on their budget, and try to really have them keep it succinct and allow you more time to ask them questions.
That would be great. And I also fully expect there to be some kittens in your presentation.
Kittens and cows, you got it.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you.
Leslyn?
Thank you, Martha, and I apologize. I wasn't trying to blow you off earlier. I did mention for me to attend this meeting, I might be multitasking because, you know, I had a job that I'm also dealing with budget. So I was on a phone call, so I apologize for that. I was trying to listen and hear a lot of what was going on as well. Look, I don't see, I know this is hard. Everybody is saying it's going to be a hard year. It's going to be all of these things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that difficult. Our process or procedure as it is outlined and written, county administrator presents a budget. We get a budget from the county administrator, and we can decimate that budget if we want to. We can add, we can take away, we can do whatever it is that we want to do with that budget. So that process still continues. There are things Jason's going to recommend. He's going to recommend how much fund balance we use, and we can say, no, we don't want to do that, or you're using too little. So yes, there is work for us to do. Continue. I heard Amanda ask, what will we be doing? And you know, some of you answered. I didn't hear all of the answers, but I just wanted to get back to that. You know, there are going to be OTRs recommended, and we can say, yeah, no, not doing it. In all the years that we look at the budget, most of us go through that budget book. We look at baselines in departments, in agencies that we fund, whether it's the human services agencies, and we decide, do we really want to keep funding this or no? So we have work to do. And looking at this year, I will admit that I am the person who is very adamant about not laying staff off. And Deborah, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sorry. Like, I can't sit here and feel like, you know, it's okay to protect or, you know, affluent taxpayers, but put staff out to pasture. You know, like I can't, or any taxpayers, but then put staff out to pasture. I can't. So I will be straight up and say, I am not willing to sit and support a budget that we're going to be laying off staff at a time when they are probably not going to get a job anyplace else. Like, I can't live with that. I can live with us extending furlough. I can live with, you know, people going on partial furloughs, encouraging retirements, all of these things to try to figure out how we maintain staff, using fund balance. At this time, it makes no sense to me. And that's just me, not knocking anybody else's opinion. That's just me, to lay off staff or, you know, get rid of staff. People are hurting. People are hurting. No, I live in the city of Ithaca. Taxes come at you from every which way and then some. I know how difficult it is, you know, but I'm willing to suck it up and pay a little bit more if it means that one more person gets a job or stays employed, because unemployment, you know, increasing unemployment is not going to be cute, pretty, anything. It is going to be horrible. And unfortunately for me, everything revolves around a social justice platform. Everything, racial, economic, and social justice platform, because the people who end up being the ones without the jobs are generally the folks who are most marginalized in every other way. The people who face the racism, the people who face the bigotry, the people who face the poverty day in and day out. And so for me, everything revolves around that. And you know, that ranks high on my list of priorities. You know, Dave, you talked about public safety, and I'm sorry that I'm going, but I didn't have a chance before. Dave, you talk about the importance of public safety, and I saw that in the survey there, you know, how important it is to folks. And it makes sense that, you know, public safety is important. Last night, Rich talked about the number of people who are in our jails. Poverty is major. People are hurting. Shut-ins right now with COVID is a big issue. And we're going to see more of that. People are shooting each other in the street here. You know, normally you turn on the news and this is what's happening in Syracuse. Right around the corner from me, this is what's happening. And it's not just for some nefarious reason. It's all these things that are playing in, and people just feeling hopeless and everything else. So I can't subscribe to an agenda that does not support, especially in this day and age in our country, things that have to do with racial, economic, and social justice. And I have mad respect for the department heads, for the staff, because I know department heads work with the staff in coming up with the budgets that they submitted, or they'll submit to Jason and then Jason crafts in his budget. And I heard somebody say that too, about respecting them. And I want to make sure that we continue to respect that. That's what I have to share.
Thanks, Liz. And I've got Ann and Deborah, but first I want to say, look, I think it's important for us to disagree without being judgmental. I mean, I think it's important to make your points, even, you know, even sort of directly counter somebody else's point. But watch your language, please, very carefully, and
if you feel I was being judgmental someplace, say that to me directly. Tell me where I was being judgmental so I can address that, but don't use generalizations with me.
All right, we'll talk later. I want to make sure.
No, just tell me now, then I will apologize to wherever I was being judgmental.
Okay, I mean, I think talking about affluent taxpayers, I mean, all taxpayers, this is one of our problems with property tax going back forever, is that it doesn't recognize people's ability to pay. So, and I think we've heard from a lot of people about concern about the level of property tax increase we may be imposing on our residents, and it cuts a lot of different ways. So I just want to make sure that we are, you know, really all understanding that there are, you know, 14 points of view here, and frankly more than that, because like I disagree with myself on a lot of days. So
Martha, I want to appreciate what you said, but understand, and for the record, that wasn't the first use of the word. I was repeating what was used. That's it.
Okay. So I also want to point out that there are ways to, one of the things that's come up here, and I think Dave mentioned it, the idea of laying people off, you know, cutting hours as opposed to cutting whole positions. So I think that's something that we can contribute to staff to say, okay, how can we meet your salary budget, perhaps preserving positions, preserving employment without, you know, but cutting some of the hours is another way to sort of to shave our costs. So I think the other thing to say is that public safety is one of those really funny categories. It includes assigned counsel, it includes alternatives to incarceration, and it includes the jail and road patrol. So it really probably should have, in the survey, should have been a somewhat different question, but that's the question that I came up with. So Anna, Deborah, and then Annie.
Thank you, Leslyn, for asking, you know, for that to be as part of this conversation. I think airing, you know, what we are all feeling and how we're talking and having it here is really good and healthy. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Martha, for clarifying. A few things, I mean, what I'm seeing, and it's very noteworthy how vastly different our opinions are on how to solve our deficit. We have 14 people, we have 14, you know, seemingly very dramatically different opinions that span a very wide gamut. So again, I would just note that we are not going to agree. And if we prioritize trying to convince each other of our opinions, I think that we will come out with a lot of ugly, maybe personal or hurt feelings. So I just wanted to point out, coming from that place of really respecting and trying to understand at least where we're all coming from. I personally am also coming from I will come from a social justice and racial justice lens. I'm specifically looking at the ways in which COVID has impacted certain populations because it has not affected different populations in the same, various populations in the same way. And if our job is protecting the public good, I think that that is something that we need to take into consideration. I personally would like to see from the department heads in their presentations an outline of the cuts that they're recommending, but also a real bid for why not cutting in their department. They're the ones that are the most capable of explaining and championing for the programs and services in their department. So that's something that I would personally really like to see. And Jason, if possible, it might be a really good idea. I would like to see an explanation of the reserve fund in greater depth. We talk about it, but what would be the impact in, say a $500,000 reduction? So, 1% by 1%, what would that mean to the reserve fund? Maybe going into greater depth about what we use the reserve fund for, what would be not only the short-term impacts, but actually the long-term impacts. I would like to understand that from your perspective as we go through this, and what would be the repercussions. And the last thing that I would say is that several people have mentioned, and I very much appreciated it during email exchanges, that sometimes cutting a program completely, we need to think about how hard it will be to bring it back if it's something that we long-term want to bring back. And sometimes cutting something completely has greater long-term consequences than we think. And I think we need to think of all of these as both the short-term and long-term implications with respect to our priorities and goals as a government body.
Thanks very much, Anna. Deborah, and then Annie.
Yeah, I feel that people haven't heard an important message here, which is that just because you don't put something at the top of your priority list doesn't mean you're blind to it or that you think it's unimportant. Quite frankly, I think the most important thing we should be worried about is the increasingly rapid pace of climate change and what we're doing to fight that. It doesn't mean that I don't think racial or economic or social justice is unimportant. I just think we're all going to fry together if we don't address this issue. I don't judge any of you for not sharing my priorities, and I don't appreciate being judged, however implicitly, for not sharing yours.
Thanks, Deborah. Annie.
So I'm just thinking back, it's a little too late to do this, but, people, there's and I don't know how to address this without saying what other people are talking about. I wish we had had some ground rules from the beginning that we don't try not to respond to somebody else, especially in a negative way or things that were in the serve way. And so, and just Martha, when you pointed out what Leslyn said, to me, that was nothing compared to what some other people had already said, directed at people or seemingly directed at people of things that we had already said. So, but we can do that now of try just to say what's important to us. And, when we're talking, really try to, to say it in that kind of way and not as a follow-up to what somebody else said in their survey or here. If we can try and do that, because to me, this is about trying to come together and figuring out how to do this. This sucks. I mean, as we know, this sucks. People here that have kids, that have had family members affected by COVID and the economics of this and racial justice issues. So it sucks. This is really hard for all of us. It's really tense. So the other thing I wanted to, and I really, and I've said this before, I really respect everybody here. Everybody brings something, and I value, and I listen to everything that everybody says, and everybody brings something to the table, really valuable. So the other thing is fund balances. So yes, so to me, that's really important. And I'll be at that meeting today at 3 for the, when we're getting the information about the audit. And I'm hoping that's crystal clear of like, how many pots of money? I mean, because that's, when my wife was unemployed a few years back, it was like, okay, what do we owe? Where's our different pots of money? What can we get at? What is going to hurt us in the long run? Blah, blah, blah. And So, you know, for me, if for instance, if we have $45,000, I'm sorry, 45 million, you know, those are the type of questions we need to like talk about as far as I'm concerned. That, okay, for instance, right now, I'd be willing to use 5 million a year if we needed to over the next 4 or 5 years, if that would help us not have to cut people, if that would help keep maintenance of effort in our programs and things like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. Leslie and then Jason. Oh, hold on one sec. Jason, did you want to answer something specific?
I go after Leslie.
Okay, go ahead, Leslie.
No, I don't want anybody to interpret my passion about what matters to me as putting theirs down. That's not what I'm doing. I listen to everybody talk about what's important to them, and I'm saying what's important to me. That's not putting anybody else's priority down. You know, me seeing real clearly that I am not going to support an agenda or a budget that doesn't address these issues is no different than other people saying, I'm not going to, you know, I want to support public safety, or I want to support, or I want to support. That's just my opinion. I was very clear on that. Okay? So I'm not putting down anybody else's opinion or whatever is priority to them. What I'm hearing around the room is that, you know, there's some inclination from a number of people about looking at fund balance and being able to use some fund balance. That's one of the things that I think is a good, maybe a point of semi-agreement for all of us going out of here, that there are things that are important. We all look at fund balance, depending on what the county administrator recommends that we use, that we may be able to use a little bit more, you know, to get us through, you know, year by year, where we'll get more information and decide where we go, what next. I'm also hearing around the room, just as a point of agreement, that we're not all willing to hike taxes up to 10%. That would be, you know, political suicide and everything else, community suicide. It's not going to be good for any of our taxpayers. But I'm not hearing people say well, except for one, not raise taxes at all. You know, Dan said, you know, why we just not raise taxes? I heard that. So, you know, there may be some place where we can, you know, inch it up just a little bit to try and meet some of those needs. So I think that's also a really important point walking out of here that we can probably all sort of hold on to. That's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Jason.
I got the range. I got the no tax increase, but definitely under the 11 mark. It's a good range to fall within. We'll work with that. Several things I just wanted to mention to you. First, the results-based accountability. You want to know more about specific programs, cost structure, and outputs of those programs. While RBA is still being developed, it's in the blast budget book. It can give you more specificity about a specific program. It can also give you some more narrative about outputs and how the performance of those programs are doing. So I would encourage you to look at results-based accountability, RBA. It's not complete, so there are definitely departments that have not completed it yet, but for the ones that have, you can get some good understanding of some metrics that we use as we are still developing, but in terms of measuring successes of certain departments. So it'll give you some more context, if anything, about departments. Several things. Number one, yes, this will be difficult to go through, but keep in mind too, you have good support staff that will help you get through this process, and it will help answer the questions. There's a lot of unknowns. That is the common phrase since March, is there's an unknown. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone next week. I don't know what the budget's going to look like September 8th, but I can assure you that you've got some good support folks here that will help work through that process. That then also says is you have a process, and you generally have gone through many times. It's you know, discussion to nauseam, but nonetheless you get through a process, right? And you do come to a conclusion, and I don't think that's going to change here. I think you're going to continue to go through your process. You're going to continue to debate your issues. You're going to work through those, and at the end of the day, I'm comfortable and confident you're still going to have a good product. And it's hard to understand it now because there's so many unknown factors, but I think if you stick to the process you're familiar with, there will be good dialogue and you will come out with the right conclusions. I know you can't necessarily see that right now, but just trust me, we'll get you to that point. As far as my approach with departments, you know, the past 2 years I've proposed budgets. I generally like to bring a budget forward that I'm supportive of what they're asking for, and they're supportive of what I'm proposing. And while I may not recommend every OTR, the conversation with the department head in mind is this is why I can't recommend it, but I'm not going to prohibit it from going forward. And they understand the reason on why I'm not recommending it or supporting it. It just doesn't. And in this case, more so than the past, it doesn't mean that I don't necessarily agree that it's important. It's just there's priorities that have to be able to prioritize, and that when we bring a budget forward, we try to bring it forward as collectively as we can. The last thing is a little spoiler alert is, you know, when you meet in a little bit, you're going to find out your fund balance did grow a little bit. So it's a good thing, because last 2019 was still a strong year. You had an excellent budget that you adopted in 19. We had some higher revenues than expected. So you will have some additional cushion, so to speak, and some growth in your fund balance. And Rick will talk about that. Rick will talk more about that in a little bit. So that's all I had to add. Other than it's a huge mountain to climb that you not necessarily see on the other side right now, but we will get you there. And you'll at the end of the day, you'll have a good budget that you'll at least be satisfied with at the end of it. We just have to get through the process to go through.
Thank you, Jason. Very good perspective. I appreciate that. Welcome, Mike. Mike Lane, sorry that you weren't able to join us earlier. Do you want to be put on the spot right this minute for any comments, or do you?
Yeah, I tried for about 15 minutes to get in, but I wasn't allowed in. I don't know why. I could hear you, but I don't know who was not letting me in. But now I'm here, thank goodness.
Okay.
I don't know what has been said, but I'm glad to speak if you want me to.
Yeah. In the future, if that happens, Kathy, is there another way? If anybody who can't get in, what should they do?
Probably call the office.
Calls
or
27
or email me.
Okay, that you're watching listening for the phone and watching your email, that people can try to do that in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you go ahead, and then I see Henry's got his hand up too. Floor is open, Mike. You can catch up.
What are we talking about? What would you like me to comment on? The budget as a whole?
Sure.
Okay, I see Deborah nodding her head.
Briefly, we went through the survey results, and then it's been a pretty free-flowing conversation since then.
Well, yeah, the survey result, interesting survey, of course. Any survey is only as good as the questions that are written, and tried to respond to it, but I was glad to see folks that made some written comments about different things. That was helpful to me as a legislator. I guess I've said before, I'll say it again. The only way that I see we're going to get through this budget is in a combination of things. And that is a tax rate increase. It's going to take some use of our fund balance, hopefully toward one-time expenditures, for example, capital. And then it may take more furloughs or layoffs. And I know that's terribly unpopular, but when you get into situations like this, I don't know whether it's in business or whether it's in government, it's something that we have to consider for the taxpayers. I don't like it, but that's what I think we have to do. So I'm hoping that the county administrator, when he proposes a budget to us, will talk about all three areas that I've just mentioned, and maybe something else. I mean, we know we've completely lost for a while a lot of sales tax and certainly the casino revenues. And we've now learned that we have such a small tax cap. There's nothing we can do except override that tax cap, I believe. And I think that's pretty important. So that's the way I would talk in generalities.
Thank you, Mike. I see Henry's hand.
Yes. Jason, I was wondering why you chose the 12.5% rate for the budget?
So that was just a combination of trying to do projections forward as to what revenue challenges we may have, and showing that if under these certain conditions, a 12% reduction is probably a good starting, going to be a starting point based on a certain set of variables. It could have easily been 15, it could have easily been 20, but after looking at the data and looking about where we think things may project, 12% seemed to be a fair and reasonable starting point for that discussion, knowing it could go either way. It's really difficult, obviously, because there's still a lot of uncertainties with sales tax and state aid. So it was really just trying to identify a reasonable spot. You also have to keep in mind too, if you give direction to just a little bit of understanding, I mean, this isn't all just factual, all number based. If you give direction to staff and you make it unattainable, they're just gonna, they're gonna get a point to where it's just shutting down, right? I mean, I need you to give me a 30% reduction in your budget, and they're gonna look at you like, why don't you just tell me where you want me to do? I mean, you're gonna lose a level of I don't want to say commitment, but they're not gonna know where to go with that. So you've got to be able to be practical about what you're asking, and you can't necessarily just go through an exercise of futility for them, because they're spending dedicated time to really try to match this up based on the parameters you give them. So it's a blend of everything of, all right, what's a practical, based on the information we know at that moment and based on what we think may happen with a certain set of variables, here's the parameters we're going to give them. And it's really not much different than we do in normal years, but normal years we have less unknown variables, right? And when you think about it, budget retreats of the past, as they may have been difficult, the needle didn't really move a whole hell of a lot compared to what we're dealing with right now, right? I mean, the needle's going all over the place on this one. So, I mean, it's just trying to capture at the time what you think is going to happen, then giving them clear direction, and that's why that was the 12% reduction number was selected, because we felt that would give us a reasonable a place to start from.
Also, Jason, I noticed in chat, Anna brought this up and other people brought this up. Do any of the 12% budgets include staff reductions?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
I thought they would.
Yeah, it's impossible not to. I mean, when you look at everyone's budget, I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just, your budget is 85% personnel. It's impossible to cut 12% out of some of these budgets without having it impact staffing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I did just take a look at chat, and so I see, for example, job sharing as a possibility. If anybody else sees anything that, of substance that should be added or read aloud here, I can't do all that, at the same time. Jason, on the RBA information,
sure.
So we can go back to last year's budget and find that, because I'm not sure if those pages are actually on the administration's budget page.
I think it's part of the budget document, but I will make sure Kevin's listening, so we will make sure we get the link out to everyone. But I'm fairly certain it's on somewhere on there in the budget document area. So
it's in an appendix. It's in an appendix.
Oh, it's in an appendix.
You can find it from the table of contents quite easily. The third page of the table of contents has a clickable. The table of contents is all clickable. It'll take you right to it.
All right. So Budget for Dummies, if you could send us the link, and that'd be terrific. Is there, did you say he already did?
Says the voice from behind the curtain, yes.
Thank you, Kevin. So those data are from 2019. Has there been any updating on any of that?
RBA, we're going through an update document now of it. We're trying to update things. Obviously, it was hard. It's been hard just with everything happening mid-year. So, but we're updating the RBA document now, and it'll be part of the updated budget, the proposed budget.
Okay.
I mean, you may find it very helpful to understanding outputs and performance of certain programs, and it does describe them, I think, in some more program parameter perspective versus the budget. And budget, functional units is kind of a little more rigid way of looking at it. So it may give some people context that they're looking for.
Okay, good to know that'll be updated. Mike Sigler, I see you've got a long comment in the chat. Do you want to just, since I can't skim that and talk at the same time, did you want to make your point here? You have to get off mute. You're muted, Mike. Mike, you're muted.
It was, I know, Maury gave me a briefer on how to run this thing. So. Yeah, my commentary was basically, wasn't really commentary per se. It was directed toward Jason, though. Primarily was just that, we talk about all these different positions and stuff, and I didn't know if maybe 80% of our budget is payroll. It's like any other business, really. So when you talk about cuts like this, I mean, that's what you're really basically talking about. It would be helpful, I think, to me to know, like, there are certain jobs in the county that we pay, like, say, 50% of or 25% of, particularly in like DSS and things like that. It would seem kind of counter to what we're trying to do to cut any of those jobs, because you're basically losing money when you do that. And I'm not, again, advocating for any job cuts. I'm not at that point yet. I don't know. It would seem hard for me, though, to foresee us coming to a budget that includes cuts if you're not actually going to cut any people. I don't know how you get there. So, because we can talk about things like, well, we're going to cut roads. Well, our people still build the roads. Plus, anytime you cut a road, it's just going to be more expensive 2 years from now. I mean, roads deteriorate extraordinarily quickly, as anybody that's done this will tell you. It's kind of remarkable. So yeah, I mean, we can defer maintenance on some things, but in the end, it doesn't really save that much money. So I guess that would be helpful to me, is to know, I mean, there are some jobs, I don't want to say that they're protected, but they're protected in the fact that we don't spend that much money on them. You know what I'm saying? There's some jobs in the county that, sure, the county may cut in 25%, but the state then comes in with another 25%, and then the 50% is paid for by the feds. I mean, why would we wouldn't even look at that job. So I just don't want us to get kind of bogged down. And then maybe we do need a longer discussion as a county and as county legislators. There may be something that you're sacrosanct about, that you're like, listen, we're not cutting this. Okay, then why are we spending a lot? If you and, I wouldn't even say it would be 7 people. I would say if you and 4 other people believe that way, then yeah, we're probably not going to cut that. And it would be better to know that beforehand than afterward. I mean, why then would we waste a lot of time on it? You know what I'm saying?
All right, thanks very much, Mike. I don't see any other hands. I do have a couple of other other thoughts that I would just add. Number one, I guess, Jason, if you, as you plan your presentation for September 8th, clearly the capital program and fund balance discussion are going to really be critical. So, we actually passed a separate capital budget. So let's make sure that first meeting includes a healthy chunk of time to understand the proposal for the capital budget. I think for one of my takeaways here is that there's really no silver bullet that's going to save us, including a federal relief bill, although that would be a really pretty big bullet. So I think we're going to have to do a little of this and a little of that, maybe a lot of something else. And that's probably how we're going to end up coming up with something that'll get at least. And I hope that we can that's kind of the spirit that I'm looking for, of everybody saying, all right, well, let's try out whatever might work and combine that with other things. I would also mention, by the way, in case anybody's forgotten, next year is an election year. So no pressure or anything, just pointing out, we did have.
That we'll all be out of a job.
Talk about unemployment. it's pretty remarkable that when we pass a local law like overriding the tax cap, we don't have anybody come to that public hearing, and we haven't maybe since the first time. And maybe the first time we had somebody say, "What's up with this tax cap? It's a terrible idea." So but I hope the public is paying attention. I would submit that I think there's more than one audience when we make our points. It's not just each other, but it's also the public. So, one person's statement of principle is somebody else's long speech. Let's try to, read the room, read the Zoom, and, balance the things that we all have to say. Personally, I think questions are really critical. I often learn from somebody else's question that I never thought about. Henry does a really good job of raising those kinds of things. So I'm going to, as we go into the EBC meetings, I think we'll certainly all have to discipline ourselves and try to focus on the budget related issues. But I want people not to feel they have to apologize to ask questions. So, anybody else have any other comments? Everybody worn out here? All right, a huge thanks to our staff. I know that all of them are really way overboard on the time they've spent thinking deeply about what we're proposing, what we're doing this year, and what we have to look at for next year. As Jason pointed out, we have something like 40 people retiring, and that's certainly a healthy number where we can restructure some areas without the painful choice of laying people off. So I think Jason and the staff have set us up already with some very good tools to get us through 2020 and to be prepared for 2021. So thanks to everybody for their work. Thanks, Jason, and please share that with all of our department heads as well. Jason, you want to take us out?
Sure. The only thing I'll end on is that, more so than ever, I'll make myself available post-release or even before release of the proposed budget. If there's a one-on-one conversation any of you want to have with me or two of you at the same time to sit down, go over some things, questions you may have, I'll make myself available to do that, understanding that, there may be some extra need for one-on-one conversations to explain things that you may not understand or want to know more about, or simply want to argue with me about, which is perfectly okay too. So I just want to put that out there that we'll make ourselves available to you to support you in any way you can so that you can make the decisions that you feel are the best decisions moving forward.
Thank you, Jason. I think people will use your open door.
Sure.
Thank you. So just one last plug. I'm gonna resend the survey. Now I know a lot of people had trouble getting into it, so I'm gonna use your personal addresses as well as your county addresses in the initial invite. That might help with some of the hiccups on the SurveyMonkey system. So, but do just answer one time, please. And if you have nuances about what you're voting for, it'd be great if you use the comment boxes, and that'll help us sort through the meaning of your answers. So, all right, with that, thanks everybody. We saw the kitten, Annie. Where did it go? We saw the cat. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Jason.
you.
Thank
Some
you.
people want to see the cat again, Annie. All right. There we go.